We were so broke, I couldn't even afford bread and butter for my kids. That's not a figure of speech. That is the specific, literal fact of a Tuesday in February in Chicago, 1998, when I opened the refrigerator and found 2 eggs, a mostly empty jar of peanut butter, and a box of baking soda I kept there for the smell. My daughter Maya was 7. My son Cole was 5. They were in the living room watching a cartoon on a television with a broken volume dial, and I could hear them from the kitchen, and I stood at the refrigerator and thought about what I was going to make for dinner. Dean was at Navy Pier. He went most evenings when the weather permitted, which in February in Chicago means most evenings did not permit it, but we needed whatever he could bring in, and so he went anyway. Saxophone case open on the ground, gloves with the fingers cut off so he could feel the keys, breath coming out in clouds under the string lights. He played well. He has always played well. On good nights, someone would stop and stay for a whole song, and the case would have something worth counting when he came home. On bad nights, he came home blue-fingered and quiet, and we didn't talk about it much. I put on my coat, and I walked 6 blocks to my brother Gavin's house. Gavin lived in Lincoln Park, which is 12 minutes from where we were, but might as well have been a different country. He had a good job at a regional logistics company called Caldwell Group, one of those corporate ladder climbers who had hit middle management by 32 and treated it like he'd summit Everest. He drove a Lexus. He had a Sub-Zero refrigerator that I had seen once, briefly, and that I thought about sometimes when I was looking at my own. His wife Pamela made a pot roast every Sunday that could feed 8 people, and I knew, because my mother had mentioned it twice in passing, that they had leftovers they didn't always finish. I knocked on his door at 7 in the evening with my hands in my pockets. He answered in a dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, half a glass of wine in his hand. He looked at me for a moment, the way you look at something you weren't expecting and aren't pleased to see. "Lorelei," he said. "Hey," I said. "I'm sorry to come without calling. I was wondering if you had any leftovers from dinner. The kids haven't eaten, and I'm a little short this week." He looked at me for a long moment. Behind him, I could smell the pot roast. There was light and warmth and a dining room table with candles still burning from their dinner. He had everything I had come to ask about, and more. "You walked over here," he said, "to ask for my leftovers. I know it's a lot to ask. It's embarrassing is what it is." He didn't lower his voice. Pamela was somewhere behind him, and I could see she had come to the kitchen doorway. "You and Dean playing music on street corners like some kind of I don't understand how you live like this, Lorelei. I genuinely don't. You people are never getting out of the gutter." I said nothing. My hands were very cold in my pockets. "You know what your problem is?" He was warming to it now, the way he always warmed to things. "You made choices. You married a saxophone player. You didn't finish your degree. You made choices, and now you want to come to my door asking for my pot roast." He looked at me with something that was almost pity, but not quite. "Be grateful for whatever scraps people give you. That's where you are." He went inside. He came back with a Tupperware container and handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I said thank you. He said goodnight and closed the door. I walked back 6 blocks in the cold with the Tupperware against my chest to keep it warm. Maya and Cole ate the leftover pot roast and mashed potatoes, and they were happy about it, and I watched them eat, and I kept my face very still. Dean came home around 9 with $23 in the case and frozen ears, and I heated soup, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I told him what Gavin had said. Not all of it. The version I could say out loud, without what was underneath it getting loose. "You'll die broke and alone," Gavin had said before he went back inside. I had left that part out. I was still carrying it when I got into bed that night, and I carried it for a very long time after that. Tell me where you're watching from if you remember hard years like this. Because the next part is about what I did with what he said. What I did was write it down. Not in a journal, not in the way people describe their feelings to process them. I wrote it at the top of a yellow legal pad I bought at the dollar store on Milwaukee Avenue, and I wrote it like a goal. Prove it wrong. Then I listed below it everything I needed to learn to do that. I had 2 years of community college business credits from before Maya was born. I had worked every kind of job that exists in a working-class Chicago neighborhood. Waitressing, receptionist, data entry, inventory at a warehouse on the north side. I understood numbers, and I understood logistics, and I understood, from watching Dean navigate the informal economy of street performance, that there were systems everywhere, and that most of them had gaps in them that nobody was paying attention to. I started with a bookkeeping certificate through a night program at community college. Then a second certificate in supply chain management. Dean picked up more shifts at a jazz club on Rush Street. Not enough to change things overnight, but enough to give me a few $100s a year I put into an account I didn't tell anyone about. I studied on the kitchen table after the kids were asleep. I read trade publications I checked out from the Harold Washington Library on State Street. I asked questions of people I met through work, the kind of slow and careful questions you ask when you're trying to understand a thing without announcing that you're trying to understand it. By 2004, I had a job as an operations coordinator at a mid-sized food distribution company called Harlow Supply. By 2007, I had moved up enough to understand how the whole business was structured and to see, clearly, that there were 3 things they were doing that they didn't need to be doing and 2 things they weren't doing that they should have been. I wrote it up in a memo. My supervisor looked at it and passed it to her supervisor. 6 months later, they implemented half of it and saved $200,000 in annual distribution costs, and I got a raise and a new title. I also got an introduction. Miles Bennett was a consultant the company had brought in for a restructuring conversation. He was 60, quiet, the kind of man who asks questions and then actually listens to the answers rather than waiting for his turn to talk. We were in a meeting together, and he asked a question that most of the room fumbled, and I answered clearly from first principles without notes. After the meeting, he stopped me in the hallway. "You understand this industry," he said. "I've been paying attention for a while," I said. We had coffee twice in the next month. He asked me where I'd gone to school, and I told him the honest version, and he didn't flinch. He told me he'd been working with a small investment group for 15 years that focused on distressed companies with recoverable fundamentals. He said most of the people he'd learned to trust had gotten there the hard way. He said if I was interested in the investment side, he'd be willing to help me understand it. I was interested. Subscribe if you believe that people who get knocked down hard should never be underestimated. Because what happened next took 9 more years, and I want you to stay with me. Caldwell Group, my brother's company, the logistics company he'd climbed for 20 years, announced financial difficulties in 2015. Not immediately public, not announced the way disasters usually are. I knew because Miles knew. He had been watching the company for 2 years through his investment group, which I was by then a part of, with a stake I had built carefully over a decade from savings and smart decisions, and the particular financial discipline that comes from having been very poor and not wanting to go back. Caldwell had bad debt, outdated infrastructure, and middle management that had gotten fat and slow during a decade of easy margins. The board was looking for a buyer. Miles's group was positioned to make an offer. The conversation about the acquisition took 18 months. I was in the room for most of them. My name was in the paperwork. When the deal closed in the fall of 2016, I held a 17% ownership stake in Caldwell Group, which made me one of the 3 largest individual shareholders. The previous management was kept largely in place during the transition, pending review. Standard practice. The review was thorough and quiet and took about 6 weeks. At the end of it, a meeting was called with department heads. I walked in and sat down at the head of the table. My brother was there. He was in the second chair from the left, which is where mid-level executives sit when they've been there long enough to feel entitled to proximity to power, but not long enough to have any. He was looking at his phone when I came in. He looked up when the room went quiet and did the thing faces do when they see something they cannot immediately make sense of. He said my name, not as a greeting, as a question. "Gavin," I said. I let the silence sit. "I want to be straightforward with everyone in this room," I said. "I'm part of the ownership group that acquired this company. My role going forward will be in senior oversight. Each of your positions will be evaluated on merit over the next quarter." I looked at him directly. "That applies to everyone equally." His face went through several things. I watched all of them. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, the way you feel in the version of the story where you've imagined it. But what I actually felt was something quieter. The specific satisfaction of having done the thing you said you would do. Later, after the meeting, he found me in the hallway.
Lorelai. He stopped.
He didn't have whatever he'd been planning to say. I didn't know.
I know you didn't, I said.
That night, when you came to the house. You gave me your pot roast, I said. And something else that turned out to be more useful. He looked at me. He didn't understand what I meant. He might never understand what I meant. That was okay. I understood. Gavin kept his job. His role was restructured, significantly reduced, in ways that reflected what the position actually required rather than what he'd accumulated through proximity and tenure. He understood, from the shape of the restructuring, where it had come from. He never said anything directly about it. I didn't expect him to. My mother called 3 weeks after word got out. She had things she wanted to say, and I listened to all of them, and then I said I needed to get back to work. Dean was there at the house when I got home. He had a gig at a small venue on the north side, and he came back smelling like jazz bar smell, warm and a little smoky, something about the specific combination of old carpet and brass instruments and people who came to listen. He put his saxophone case down and he looked at me, and he asked how the day was.
Long, I said. Good.
He nodded. He made tea. We sat at the kitchen table the way we'd sat at the kitchen table in Chicago in 1998 with $23 and 2 kids and the cold coming through the windows, and I thought about the distance between that table and this one. The same people who laughed when my kids were hungry stood when I entered that boardroom. He said I'd die broke and alone. But in the end, I was the one holding the future in my hands, and I'd been holding it quietly for a very long time.